Cinematic basically means the high quality look of a professional movie. In this video I will show you different camera movements that will add more depth and dynamics to your GoPro footage to reproduce the cinematic look as good as possible. But before we get to the individual camera movements, I would like to talk about the motivation that should underlie the camera movement. No matter which movement you want to include in your shot, it should serve a specific purpose. So you should ask yourself why you want to use this particular movement for this shot and whether the camera movement really enhances the shot. The motivation of a camera movement could be to make the shot look more dramatic, to introduce a subject, to add dynamics, and so on. Let's start with a few very simple camera movements, which are very often used in movies and therefore also contribute to a cinematic look. The first camera movement is a classic dolly, as a push in or push forward. You move as smooth as possible towards your subject. Usually the camera is moved over a track or vehicle, therefore the name dolly. The reason for this shot could be to introduce a subject or to create some tension. If you are taking a simple landscape shot or a shot of a city or street, this camera movement will help you to add some depth. With a GoPro, you don't of course need a dolly and a track. I usually use the GoPro on a pole or a hand grip and walk towards the subject as smoothly as possible. I don't hold the GoPro at eye level but lower and make sure that the subject is centered. A special variation of the push forward is when you move the camera forward slightly above the ground. In this way the movement is emphasized further and a very special effect is created. The next camera movement is nothing more than an inverted dolly, a push out or pull back. You use this shot for example to finish a scene or to take out tension. The technique is the same but you have to go backwards. It is clear that you should be careful with this. Depending on the situation, it might also be enough to reverse a push forward in post. The next camera movement is a simple pan, but I don't just turn the camera from left to right, I move the camera itself from side to side. This leads to a completely different effect and looks much more cinematic than simply turning the camera from left to right. You can use this technique for a revealing shot, for example to introduce a subject, or you can use this camera movement to enhance landscape shots, for example by adding more depth to the shot with elements in the foreground. You choose elements as foreground, which could be grass or other plants for example, and then move the camera from side to side. Because the elements in the foreground are now moving, your shot gains a lot more depth. The crane works similarly. Here you move the camera upwards also to introduce a subject. This means that you should also select an object here that you use as a foreground. This object, for example a plant, can completely cover your subject at the beginning or simply be used to give the shot more depth. The basic camera movements would also include a tilt. However, I believe that this technique sometimes produces unsightly results due to the fisheye lens of the GoPro, as the curvature of the horizon changes greatly, which looks anything but cinematic. By the way, if you are interested in which poles or which accessories I use, have a look at the links in the video description. And in case you are new here, my name is Werner, I live in the Italian Alps, and on this channel I do GoPro and filmmaking tutorials. Consider subscribing to the channel if you are interested in these topics. Now let's have a look at some more complex camera movements. Let's start with the orbit shot. Here you move in a kind of circular motion around your subject. This leads to a very cinematic and interesting effect. Similar to the previous techniques, I use a pole or a hand grip and try to keep my subject in the center of the frame. If your subject is a person, you can try to slightly tilt the camera upwards to create a more interesting but still cinematic effect. And since we are already talking about capturing people, I would like to show you the 3 variations of the tracking shot. A tracking shot is basically any shot where the camera follows backward, forward or moves alongside the subject being recorded. Basically this is not a separate camera movement, but rather 3 special types of a dolly. The GoPro is also very well suited for this kind of shot and it comes to interesting and cinematic results. I create the shot as before with a pole or a hand grip. Regardless of whether you follow the person from behind, shoot from the front or from the side, make sure that you move as smoothly as possible. The stabilization of the GoPro works great, but it will not necessarily eliminate every up and down movement. If you capture the subject from the side, you will create even more depth if there are elements between you and your subject. But be careful not to move too far away. Because of the extremely wide angle of the GoPro, the subject would get too small in the background. If you capture the subject from the front, you can again hold the camera a bit lower and tilt it slightly upwards. You will see that this leads to a nice cinematic effect. Basically, all these different camera movements can be combined in different ways to achieve unique results. For example, you can do a classic dolly push forward and then, when you are close to your subject, tilting the GoPro upwards. Or you can do a lateral tracking shot and move towards the subject at the same time. The important thing is to create your movements as smooth as possible and to use them in a meaningful way. And that's it for today. If the short tutorial was interesting for you, give me a like as feedback, and see you next time.